FPL Game Week 7 final decisions. Game Week 7 does start tomorrow morning, and finally, we can turn our backs on the awful Game Week 6. Well, it was for me anyway. In today's video, we're going to have a look at some of the key information you need to know going into the Game Week 7 deadline. We're going to answer a couple of the hot topic questions about what highly owned players might be at risk of having a benching this week. We'll have a look at a captaincy ranking. We'll have a look at any injury news from the press conferences today, and update on my team and who the best players to buy going into Game Week 7 are this week. What is up, everyone? FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here as well. And today, it is time for our Game Week 7 final decisions. We're going to start off with a couple of benching decisions. We're going to talk about Luis Diaz and Rico Lewis are being asked a lot about whether I think they're going to start going into the Game Week 7 deadline. Of course, I'm only going to be able to offer an opinion. They are both in my team, so I may be slightly biased, and I don't know for certain. Hopefully going into the deadline, we might hear news on at least one of these, given that Manchester City play at 3 o'clock, and then we have Luis Diaz and Liverpool playing at 12:30. Starting off with Luis Diaz, he has played back-to-back games. He's played twice in the past sort of week. There is a chance that it is Gakpo that starts. There are predictions that maybe it will be Gakpo that starts out on that left-hand side. However, I do still think Luis Diaz probably has about a 70% chance of playing. It is the international break after this fixture, so it's not the ideal time for him to be given a rest, although he might get some minutes away with Colombia anyway. I would give it about a 70% chance that we get a Luis Diaz start in Game Week 7. Moving into Rico Lewis, again, I offer a very similar percentage. He's played actually 3 games. He's played Tuesday, Saturday, Tuesday. But Tuesday again through Saturday is quite a big turnaround for Rico Lewis and for Manchester City. He also has 3 different places in that Manchester City team that he can play. He can play at left back, right back, and in midfield as well. So given the amount of possibilities that they have, also with the injuries to like De Bruyne still being out, for example, I do think I will predict Rico Lewis to start this one. Of course, I don't know with these, but those are my predictions. Looking at Captaincy Ranking, Erling Haaland is going to be number 1. 10 goals in 6 games. That was his first blank in Game Week 6 so far this season. I do expect him to bounce back at home to Fulham. We do have Bukayo Saka in a close second at home to Southampton. Without Martin Odegaard, he's not quite as focal and as influential as maybe they are when they play their usual 4-2-3-1 compared to the 4-4-2 that they're sort of playing at the moment. But I do like the fixture with Southampton looking very bad so far this season. Cole Palmer is in at number 3, having scored 4 goals last weekend. He is on red hot form. Of course, didn't feature in any European competitions midweek because he's not in the Chelsea European squad. I do like him as an option and on penalties, and a nice fixture as well. If Forest were a slightly weaker team defensively, they've been pretty good. He might bump up the list to a 2, even a 1. But because of Forest being quite solid, he is at number 3. Ryan Mbeumo isn't at number 4. Wolves still have a lot of injuries going into Game Week 7. He has, of course, scored in back-to-back games very early on. Wolves at home is a fantastic fixture. With the injuries that Wolves have got and the form that Brentford are in terms of scoring goals, he is number 4. And then we're going with Mo Salah in at number 5. Away from home in the 12:30 kickoff does knock him down a little bit, although Salah often actually has quite a good record in this fixture. They have played European football midweek, and Palace are the team that they did slip up against last year. He is still a good captaincy option in at number 5, but I think he goes below the top 4. Starting off with a bit of an injury news, it sounds like Alexander Isak is not going to feature this weekend again for Newcastle. He is still recovering from a toe injury. The thing with injuries going into Game Week 7 is it is the international break between Game Week 7 and 8. So if players are ruled out and are not featuring in Game Week 7, the chances are they won't have to go away for international duty with their countries as well, which gives them 3 weeks to recover between now and Game Week 8. I don't think we'll see Alexander Isak in the Newcastle squad at all, and Eddie Howe has said that is very likely to be the case. João Pedro also feels like he's out, and it might be a slightly longer term injury for him. He said that he's not exactly sure when he's going to come back. He is expecting him to be out longer than Jean-Paul Van Heck, the centre-back, and Van Heck said he might not play again in October, which means we're unlikely to see a return to play for João Pedro in October. It might even be late November. So if you do own João Pedro, he is a definite sell this week. Son Heung-min also likely to miss the game this weekend. They've said they will try and see what they can do to potentially get him ready for Game Week 7, but he is likely to come too soon. It also feels like one of those where maybe they are on the side of caution and then they don't rush him back and he gets the international break off. A few more bits of injury news. We also have a delayed return for Kevin De Bruyne. He is not going to be playing in Game Week 7. He's not going to be going to Belgium to play internationals. He might be back in Game Week 8 or 9. But to be honest, I'd be looking to sell if you do own him. Next up is Martin Odegaard. Again, no real exact timeline on his return. It's not going to be this weekend, and it's probably unlikely to be very soon after the international break. We're probably looking at November for Odegaard, so it does boost both Martinelli and Leandro Trossard if you're looking to buy both of them this week. The final one is at Aston Villa. Onana is likely to be back for them in their midfield. However, Ramsey and Bailey in their forward line are likely to miss out, and it's likely to come too soon for both of them to start the game. They may feature on the bench. This means that we might see a slight change in structure for Aston Villa, where we see Duran and Ollie Watkins start together up front, with Ollie Watkins leading the line, with Duran sort of running in behind, and then with Morgan Rogers as the attacking midfielder behind the two of them. A few final bits of injury news. As we said, Van Heck is likely to be out for the remainder of October. He is a sell if you own him, and it does weaken the Brighton defence as a whole. If you have attackers going up against them like Spurs this week, it definitely boosts them. Looking at Everton, we are likely to be without Branthwaite this week. They have picked up a slight addition to the injury. We've seen him be ruled out for the start of the season. Again, it looks like he won't feature this weekend against Newcastle and should be back soon after the international break. We also have rumours of a Mykolenko injury at Everton. It's not confirmed. It wasn't mentioned in the press conference yesterday, but apparently in training either yesterday or today, he's picked up a slight knock that would rule him out of this and for 2 to 3 weeks. We don't have that confirmed. I will post anything on Twitter if we see any updates. We'll discuss it in the deadline stream. I own Mykolenko. Luckily, I don't need to start him. Hopefully, he's back after the international break if the injury is true. Having a look at key players to buy then, starting off in goal. We're going to put David Raya 1 and Flecken 2. For me, they remain the best two goalkeepers, and the only goalkeepers I would consider buying into my team. If I had 5.6 million, I'd buy David Raya, and if I didn't have that money, I'd buy Flecken at Brentford. I would not buy another goalkeeper outside of those two. You could look at someone like Pickford, but then without Mykolenko and Branthwaite, I wouldn't recommend going there. Moving into defence, the Arsenal guys do remain number 1 and 2, with Gabriel number 1 and Saliba number 2. Timber, Calafiori, Ben White, all rotating too much, and there's injury doubts to all three of those going into the weekend, so it's only Gabriel and Saliba as buys to me. We do have Rico Lewis in a number 3. I've said I expect him to outscore all of the other 4.5 defenders, even if he only plays 2 out of 3 games. The way he gets forward, he's playing for Manchester City, he is definitely the third best. We've got Van de Ven. I currently think he's a better value pick over Pedro Porro, with Maddison and Kulusevski both playing together in number 8 roles for Spurs. It doesn't leave the attacking ability for Porro to get into those positions, so right now I like Van de Ven. And instead of Mykolenko being the best, cheaper option, we've gone with Aït-Nouri. There are a few other options in at 4.5. You could have a look at Colwill if he rotates well in your team. You could have a look at Kirkes, who I've mentioned a few times in the past. I've gone with Van de Ven as the 4.5, and if you need a little bit of money, Aït-Nouri for his attacking threat. Into midfield, we're going with Cole Palmer, number 1. The upcoming fixtures are not quite as good, but he looks so involved and just wants to score goals every single week. I've actually put Brian Mbeumo above Saka. Saka is just less involved when they play this 4-4-2, and he's about 3 million more than Mbeumo, so Mbeumo's value is great. If you need a cheaper option and you're selling Eze, for example, I like Brennan Johnson at Spurs away at Brighton, who I've said a week without Van Heck, and then McNeil is my favourite cheaper option, but I don't mind cheaper options in Mavididi, in the likes of Semenyo I also like Rogers, Carvalho at Brentford in at 4.8, and then Dibbling in at 4.6, all good options this week. And then we're moving up front. Of course, no Erling Haaland in this list, but if you have money to buy Haaland, he is the best forward to buy in the game this week. Dominic Solanke, number 1. I like the fixtures coming up, and they play Brighton this week. Havertz in at number 2. He could be number 1, but I do like other Arsenal assets a lot, so he's not quite as essential maybe as if there weren't as many other Arsenal players. Calvert-Lewin is in number 3. I still like him despite no points in the past 2 game weeks. Delap at 5.6 now is a really nice option away at West Ham. And then we're going with Cunha. The Wolves fixtures, as like Aït-Nouri, starting to return and starting to look really good. Cunha is like to be on penalties. He is 6.5, so slightly more expensive. But if you can get to him, I really like him as a long-term buy now. And then we're just going to wrap up by having a look at my team. Of course, I have 2 free transfers and no money in the bank. I did release a team selection video yesterday where I discussed everything I'm about to say basically in a little bit more detail. I'm keeping eyes on whether we hear if Luis Diaz starts and Rico Lewis as well. If we hear that Rico Lewis is likely to be on the bench, I will likely just bench him for Mykolenko. And if Mykolenko doesn't feature, then I will have Greaves come in off the bench. Luis Diaz as well, if he doesn't feature, I have a couple of options. I can just sell him to a cheap midfielder like Mavididi and leave a route to Cole Palmer next week. Or I can take a -4 involving selling Luis Diaz, Smith Rowe and Trent to probably Aït-Nouri or Van de Ven, Cole Palmer, and then Mavididi in midfield. So Mavididi will come in for Luis Diaz if he's benched. Of course, if Luis Diaz starts, I will just roll my transfer. But then it basically boils down to, do I think that Palmer and a 4.4 defender is better than Trent and Chris Wood, because of course Chris Wood would be the one to drop to the bench if I did make those transfers. And I personally have listened to the comments, spoken to a few people, and I don't think the -4 is really worth it unless something crazy happens going into the deadline, like Trent being benched or something, which I don't expect to be the case. So I think the likely scenario is I don't buy Cole Palmer this week. I make one free transfer if Luis Diaz is benched. If he starts, I will be rolling my transfer and just keeping an eye on whether I think Rico Lewis will start. Captaincy I didn't speak about massively on my team selection video yesterday. Haaland and Burma and Saka are all in my top 4 for Captaincy rankings this week. If I did buy Cole Palmer, I would have the top 4 in my Captaincy ranking this week. Haaland is going to be my captain at home to Fulham. Fulham have been good, but I still think City will break them down. Saka is nice, and if they had Odegaard and he was hauling so far this season, he would be up there. And Burma also in with a shout, but I think I'm just happy enough owning him. So Haaland captain, Saka vice captain. So that is all for final decisions this Friday. Of course, there will be a deadline stream at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. Thank you all so much for joining. Any questions you have that haven't been answered in this final decisions video, drop it all in the comment section down below. 2,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Of course, if you are also new and haven't heard me bang on about my new podcast, Know the Score, it is Premier League based. It is on Spotify. It is on YouTube. It is non-FPL. It's meant to be a bit humorous. The guy I do it with is called Luke Hempner. He is a comedian. He is an actor in the West End as well. So he brings the vibes, and hopefully I bring a bit of football stuff. Non-FPL, Premier League based. It's on YouTube. It's on my homepage. It's linked in the description. If you want a bit more content this Friday evening or over the weekend. If not, there'll be a new video out or a new podcast out on Monday as well. So subscribe to that. Subscribe to this channel. Have a lovely weekend if I don't see you. Enjoy the international break as well. There will be some videos, and I'll see you all very soon.